Hey YouTube, Doc's Motorcycle Service, rah 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 rah. Welcome back to the garage. Today in this video, I'm going to show you how to rebuild a caliper. And this is going to be pretty much the same process for rebuilding a caliper that you would on any type of caliper. Some of your more later model calipers, they might be a little bit more complex. There might be some more pieces to them. It could be a single piston caliper. It could be a dual piston caliper. Inside the caliper body, you're going to have a piston, and that piston, when pressurized on your rear brake, you have a foot pedal. When you squeeze down on that or press down on that pedal, the pressure inside the reservoir increases, pushing the fluid down the line to the rear brake caliper. That fluid then travels into the caliper body and it causes the piston to push out. As the piston pushes out, it compresses the brake pads to the rotor, therefore creating friction. That's why they're called a friction brake pad, and that is what causes you to reduce speed or stop. Real quick, be sure and check out the Facebook page. Ain't going to talk a lot about it, but check it out. As you ride these things, as you use these things, whether it's an automobile, a pickup truck, or a motorcycle, there's going to come a point in time where you're going to have to repair these brake calipers. While it's apart, that's a good time to inspect it. What we're going to be doing here today is good for an early 1984 up to 1987 rear single piston caliper. But again, the techniques are the same. The part itself has changed, but the way it functions and the way to rebuild it has not. Let's go ahead and take a look at this caliper, and one of the key things I want to point out to you, because it's a tech tip if you want, but is looking for flaws, looking for things that are not right. Once you train yourself to look for things that are not right, then you will better understand how to find problems on your motorcycle. Service manual. Don't do nothing without it. If you don't have one for your motorcycle, get one. A wealth of information. You should not be starting any project without a service manual for your motorcycle. So this is your caliper mounting bracket. This is your rotor. When everything is set up the way it should be, your rotor is going to pass through the body of the brake caliper. This is where your brake line comes in. So this is where your fluid flows in and out of the caliper. This is your bleeder screw, and you'll see more about that here in a little bit. Tech tip, safety tip, if you don't have a cap on your bleeder screw, find one and put it on there. Even if this one has a little rubber tab on it that mounts under the hex part of the bleeder valve to keep it from falling off if it comes off. If you don't have one on there, just go buy one and stick it on there and let that little piece flop. You want to try to keep dirt and debris out of this. It will help you down the road. So this is something that you can look for and inspect on the caliper on your bike. On the inside, we have the inner brake pad. We've got two screws that hold the caliper body to the caliper bracket. So we're going to take those out now. The screws on each side of this travel through the body into the upper and lower pins. You can probably see these right here, right by my finger and my thumb, along with the two boots that compress. All right. The idea here is that when you apply pressure and this piston starts to come out, the nanosecond after it makes contact with the rotor, it's still pressing, this floats over and these compress, bringing the inner pad into contact with the rotor. And then you just manipulate it and it'll come apart. So your pads, this is going to be the one that was on the inside. This is going to be the one that was on the outside. Immediately something jumps out to me. Where your piston comes in and out of the body, it's nice and round and shiny. But if you look at the pad, you'll notice that there's not a solid ring around it. There's some funny marks right here. That is a hint. We're going to look into that further here in a minute. Look at your brake pads, the thickness of your pads. Are they lining up good and straight? Is there more off of one end than the other? I mean, are they cattywampus when you push them together? Is there gaps? Is there any problems? Your pads, you're just going to have to look at them and use your service manual to determine the thickness of your pads and whether or not you can reuse those. Something's jumping out at me here. You can see how black these are, and they're very smooth. They shouldn't be that smooth, and they shouldn't be that black. And as greasy as these are, this is telling me that there was a leak somewhere. Now, you'll also notice right here there's a ring mark, a round ring mark. That makes me suspect as well. If you can see the shiny part right here on the edge, this whole thing should be shiny like that. It should not be smooth like that. It should have a texture to it, sort of like this carpet does. Not quite as bad, but there should be a texture to it. They're very smooth like glass. That could be a sign of overheating. It could also be a sign that a contaminant has gotten on here. Motor oil, grease, brake fluid. I'll show you better on the new pads. See how smooth these are? The old ones, and how shiny they are? These are not. These have a texture. So listen. Nothing. This has to have a texture on it. You can see the little metallics in it. That's what creates the heat, that creates the friction that helps you stop. Glazed over? No, it's just going to slide on that rotor like two pieces of steel. This is what you want. And that's the way they should look. While you're there, take a look at your screws. Make sure that whatever type of head your bolt has on it, that it's fitting good. Make sure the threads look good on all of them. If you've been following this series, you already know that on the original bracket, there was a problem. You're going to see it right here. Can you see all of that wear? That's where the rotor was coming in contact with this mounting bracket, and that just should not be. This is the inside here, so it would go like this. For there to be this kind of roughness on this, if this rotor was causing that, you would find gouges and scratch marks all over this thing. So undoubtedly something happened previously, and they corrected the problem and replaced the rotor. There'll be a little link showing up right here for the video on that. I'd highly recommend you go take a look at it. Turning our caliper mounting bracket over, what we're going to see is where the caliper body mounted to the bracket. You have an upper pin bolt and a lower pin bolt. You also have a pin boot. A lot of times, because this is a floating system, these bolts float. They're not compressing a whole lot right now. This one's compressing a little bit. But can you see the problem? There's a chunk of that boot missing. Not too good. They've lost their resilience. Keep in mind that you want to keep these separate because they are different. One is a little bit shorter than the other, and they pull out. See the difference there? There's a lip right here on the edge of that piece where this boot snaps around that lip. But as you can see, there's a piece of it missing. And there's a piece missing over here too. So these boots are not included in the caliper rebuild kit. You have to order them separately. Your screw goes through here and then screws into that piece there. Now, when that's the way it is, it'll come out of there once that lip is removed. because it's floating. So what we're going to do is put our screws in here so we can keep up with them and set it to the side. Now let's move on to the caliper. You remember me talking about the pad and not having the constant ring around it because it's interrupted by something. You can see dirt and grease around it. All right, can you see the seal there around the caliper? It's blowed out. It's popping out. It's tore up. There's pieces missing. You can see right here, there's a chunk missing there. And if you look real carefully, right here, you can see how this seal has pulled up over the top of that lip. It should be all the way down here, but it's not. These are important. These are dust boots. And these dust boots prevent contaminants from getting in between the wall of the piston and the wall of the caliper body as the piston moves in and out. This can be a problem. You have fluid going in here, which fills up the body, which presses the piston out. As that piston moves in and out, this dust boot is supposed to cover the outer rim of the piston while covering the edge of the caliper body to protect that piston from contaminants and leaking fluid on the way out. I can only imagine that once we get inside here, we're going to find a problem either on the inside wall of the body or on the outside wall of the piston. This is really where your service manual comes into play. Your service manual is going to give you a breakdown of every piece in here. And if we don't find those pieces in the caliper, then we know they're missing. But also at the same time, it's going to tell us if our rebuild kit is complete. Because sometimes pieces get left out. And if they do get left out, you want to know that. So always reference everything about your rebuild kits with everything that you have coming off of the caliper, along with what your service manual says should be there. I personally like to open the rebuild kit first to see what's in there, because it'll give me a hint as to how the pieces come out. So here's your retaining ring. It's just a glorified snap ring. This looks like our piston boot. This piece right here. This looks like our inner seal. Now, I talked about this before in the fork rebuild video, and I'll put a link up here to that. But you have two different types of rubber rings. You have an O-ring and you have a seal. Typically, your seal is very square. It's square this way and it's square that way. Your O-ring is going to be round like this ring. Can you see the edges of it? You're going to have your new piston. I'm touching this piston, and this piston is as smooth as glass, and it needs to be smooth as glass to allow it to slide in and out of that body as it needs to. If it gets hung up in there somewhere and then you let off the brake, it's not going to go back in. Therefore, your pads are going to remain in contact with your brake rotor and either glaze your brake pad, which means to make them smooth like that because of heat, or overheat and warp your rotor. Now, tech tip. Stuff gets damaged in transition while it's being made. Take a look at your new parts. Make sure it ain't been dropped. Make sure it ain't got no rough edges on it. Make sure it ain't got any sharp edges on it. If it does, send it back, get another one. The inside of this is not that important because nothing's going to come in contact with it. That ring I showed you on the back of that piston, that ring, or on the back of the pad, is caused by this piston making contact with it and pushing it in and out. Check your rubber stuff. Look for snags or tears. Make sure that it's in good shape. Make sure there's nothing flawed on it. There's no telling how long this rebuild kit has been laying on somebody's shelf because it was made for a bike that's 34 years old. Nice square edges, resilient, no tears. What we're going to do now is get the piston out. That it looks like this retaining ring goes around the piston boot and holds it in place. You can see there's a little lip once it's in place right there. And that matches up with what we got going on here. Even though this is pulled out right here, I'm going to go ahead and try to get this little snap ring out. And right there's the little crack. So I'm going to work my way into it, work under it, pry it off, get it moving up, and just work it around. And that's going to bring the boot with it. Well, the boot's pretty much tore all to pieces. So there's really nothing to save here. Oh, I forgot. We had to take that little clip out. It just pops in and out. And nothing major there, but we'll clean that back up. Yeah, this thing's tore up pretty good. There's our old ring. Ring looked pretty good, but we're not going to reuse it. And it feels like this boot is stuck inside the piston ring. So now what we're going to do, you can try to pull that piston out, but I doubt it's going to happen, so I'm going to show you a neat little trick. We're going to take our pads and we're going to lay them back in here. We're going to hold them in place. We're going to take our air hose over here to the inlet for the brake line. We're going to apply some pressure, and that should pop that piston out. If it doesn't pop that piston out, that's going to let me know that there's a problem in there. If a contaminant got in there, it probably rusted something. If water got into it. If it wasn't water, it could be dirt and grime. We'll look at it, but we're going to try the air now. What I'm using is a compressor with a air line on it. Tech tip, go real easy with this. It can blow these things out. So we're going to hold our pads here, giving them some room. We're going to come over here, we're going to hit the bottom of this thing, and we're going to seal it up good and tight by pressing in on it here. We'll get just a little bit of air. Did you see that? Pushed it right out. I'm kind of surprised it came out that easy. So now, we'll wiggle our pads out. We'll come right here. Still not there. Apply a little bit more pressure. And that should do it. No, not quite. There she went. Ew. Okay, one at a time. So we can see that this lip right here has an indentation on it right there. Our dust boot is going to snap around that. But we're not going to put that on just yet. So we'll just go ahead and pull this off. If this piston doesn't have any Mars on it, you can call this a tech tip. We'll do a little tech tip. Tech tip. Or as Austin Powers might say, tech tip. You don't always have to replace the piston unless there's a problem with it. I ordered a kit that came with the piston because that's the only way I could get it for a 34-year-old bike. You know I love my pick. If you're buying one, or if your plan is to just buy the rebuild kit without the piston, go real easy with this. Don't mess it up. You can play with it by getting this seal out of it, but do not scratch it up. I'm just going to pull this off. You can see how badly that was marred up. And since I can put my finger through it, or my pick through it, that tells you that if it was getting from out here into there, something was probably getting in here. I'm looking at this thing. Let's wipe it up so we can see it real good. So, can you see them scratch marks right there? They're not very big, right there at my finger. Those little scratches, I can't really feel them. If you can feel a difference in them, that's a problem. What else do we have here? We got some black stuff right here. Yeah, I can feel that. Now, What you could do, if this little black stuff here was the only problem with the piston, you could take your little emery cloth and rub over that. And I would probably go this way to get it off there, because that's the way the piston moves in and out of the caliper. You could probably make that go away. We can see some roughness right here, where undoubtedly, because it's clean everywhere else except right in there, that's probably where that tear was on the seal. Let's look inside here. Our square seal, that rides right in here. You can probably see it right there, that rubber seal. Now what that does, or what it's supposed to do, is as your piston rides in and out, it keeps the fluid in and the contaminants out even more. So the fact that this piston was in there pretty tight and it took a good bit of air to get it out tells me that that seal is good. But again, we're not going to leave it in there. We don't want to scratch the inside of the caliper body. So what we're going to do is we're just going to come in here with our pick and we're going to slowly work our way into the seal and pry it up and out. And once you get that done, you can just hook it and pull it out. Now again, inspect it. I don't know if you can feel, well, I know you can't feel this. Let's see if you can see it. But there's a lot of grit on that, a lot of grit. I'll put a picture up right here. What that tells me is contaminants were getting inside there. As you can see, looking in there, yeah, there's some contaminants in that thing. A lot of bad stuff got in there. If you look where we just pulled that seal out, you can see Garbo in there too. The inside of this caliper body needs to be pristine. It needs to be as clean and as shiny as this new piston. So you say to yourself, well, what are you going to do about it? Is I'm going to take this bleeder valve out. I'm going to separate this cap. I'm going to get, and the cap is pretty rubbery. It's in good shape. I'll probably keep that. But I'm going to take that bleeder valve out. I'm going to clean it real good. And then I'm going to take some brake cleaner to this. And the reason I say brake cleaner is because brake cleaner will evaporate. And I'm going to clean this thing really good. Bleeder screw cleaned up. Again, we just used some brake cleaner, my trusty toothbrush, pick. We got down in here, and I'm going to tell you something, pretty happy with the way that turned out. We got some discoloration in the bottom, but discoloration is not the same thing as a contaminant. It's just discolored metal. Tech tip, we've cleaned this out with a lint-free rag. We cleaned up the rest of it the same way. We cleaned out the bleeder valve screw and the brake fluid line inlet. We cleaned out where the bleeder screw goes. And something that I didn't mention, but if you'll notice these fins here, this is pretty cool because this allows air to flow over that to help keep the caliper cool. So if you ever see that on something, that's typically why they're there. We got the little master cylinder here, and I wanted you to see that your master cylinder is where you find out what fluid. That tells you where and what type of fluid to use for your system. Always use the proper fluid for your system. What we're going to do now is we're going to put this thing back together. And the way we're going to do that, we're going to use a bowl, and we're going to take a little bit of our .5 brake fluid, and we're just going to put this in the bottom, and we're going to have a rag close by. I also made another executive decision. I am going to have this chromed, but I'm not going to hold the video until then. So what we're going to do is we're going to go back with the old piston. We're going to go back with the old piston seal, which fits on the inside here. We're going to use a new retaining ring. We're going to use the new piston boot. What you want to do is get you a clean bowl, get you a little bit of fluid in there. Some of your kits may come with a piston lube, all right? If they do, you just put the lube on the outside of your piston. What we're going to do is we're going to take the inner seal, and we're just going to dab it in there. We're going to get it wet just to help it go in the hole. And then we're going to stick it in here and we're going to work it around until we get it into that groove. And she popped right in. So what you want to do here is just start working it around. You may have to manipulate it a little bit to get it in there where you want it, but the key thing is to make sure that it goes in flush. And you can take your finger and rub it around and make sure it's seated really good. And then you can just take you a little bit more of your brake fluid and rub it around in there to get it ready. You'll take your piston ring, or your piston. Now your piston has to slide by that. There's nothing wrong with taking just a little bit of the fluid and smearing it on the outside of the piston ring. Alright? Or the piston, I'm sorry. And here's your tech tip. You want to line this thing up and you want to put it in, and then you want to twist it a little bit. Just a little bit to get it started. You don't want to push it in there so hard that it catches that ring, that seal we just put in, and pulls it out. So once you think you got it lined up in there, kind of get it, manipulate it. Don't kill it, because remember, we got to put this boot on. Alright, so we got that square there. We're going to take our boot and we're going to go ahead, because what has to happen is there's a lip right here between my two fingers that has to fit into that groove right there. And we're going to go ahead, we're going to dab that in the fluid to get it wet, and then we're going to put it on here. We're just going to snap it around, ease it around until it goes in. Now what you're doing is you're looking for the same area showing all the way around. And if you go to pull on it and it doesn't slide up or down, you know it's in the right spot. So now we got that in there. And remember, this lip has to go over this lip right here. So now we're just going to take this thing, slide it down, and it's seated nice and flush around the edge down here. We have the same amount showing here, our retaining ring. And what we're going to do is I like to take and hook it on the back first, which gives me the opening out here. Get it where it, spread it out a little bit, get it where it needs to be, and then snap it in. And there you go. You can see how it's nice and flush all the way around, and give it just a little bit of air, just a little bit. She eases right out, and we'll put her back in. Now take your clean lint-free towel, just wipe it up, and your caliper is now rebuilt. So for all intents and purposes, that's how you rebuild a caliper. The parts may change. There may be twice as many of them. There may be 4 sets of pads. There may be 1 set of pads. There may be 1 piston. There may be 2 piston. But overall, that's how you do it. Service manual, tech tip, I'm telling you, you got to have one of these. $12, $15, $17, well worth your money. Read through it, cover to cover. Tech tip, know what fluid your system uses. I've got .3, .4, and .5 here in the garage. Tech tip, this stuff draws water like a sponge. Undo it, pour you a little bit out to use it, then cap it back up. I hope this video helps you. Remember to subscribe to the channel. Watch some of the ads, some of the advertisements. Again, don't make a lot of money off of this, but the money that I do bring in buys another piece of chrome for the bike, which I'll show you how to put on. Another tool for the garage, which I'll show you how to use. Check out the Facebook page. Come by, hang out for a little bit. We put some stuff over there, some teaser stuff over there about upcoming videos, so we give you a hint of what direction we're going. So YouTube, as always, ride safe, handle your business, save some money. Y'all take care. See ya. And